Alright, good morning everyone. Hope you're enjoying your HBL so far. Okay, today's lesson will be a quick one. It will be about the impact of teenage marriage. Okay, I'm not gonna do the pontification and whatever that you have learned previously in your CCE lessons. Okay, today's focus is really looking at how this issue is prevalent and how it impacts girls, boys, and the general community as a whole, okay, across the entire world, right? So I'm going to address some of the misconceptions, some of the assumptions that people have about the idea of child brides and teenage marriage in, for example, less developed countries, okay? So we're going to take a look at this situation, and at the end you will come up with your own interpretation and view about this particular issue, right? That will be quite helpful for future exams. Right, so beginning always with definition, according to the UN, something that we should be all very familiar with by now, okay, formal marriage occurring before the age of 18 years of age is what is known as teenage marriage lah. Right, I think it's quite obvious. So, some people have the luxury of getting married for happiness, by their own choice, okay, by their own volition, but there are many, many millions and millions of people around the world who get married because they have no choice. Okay, and that is really the issue that we are looking at in today's lesson. So this is just a graph that I've taken from a German newspaper. Okay, why I say German newspaper is because I want you to consider the bias. Every time you look at a certain source, right, you should be looking at the biases, cognitive or not, alright, in this particular every statistic that you get. So you can see India here, population data from the UN. India here has the highest number of child marriages at over 15 million, okay, followed by Bangladesh at 4 million, Nigeria 3 million, Brazil 3 million, Ethiopia 2 million, and Pakistan 1 million. Now, this may be a little bit outdated, but the facts still remain the same. Okay, so I want you to think about it very quickly. What is the common characteristic between these countries presented here? Okay, you can take your time, Google it, pause this lecture video, okay, but as long as you get the understanding that we're looking at here. All right, so I'm going to move on very quickly. So these are actually what we call less developed countries or low income nations. Okay, not to say that they are poor, right? It is basically the idea that they are still developing, right? So in these countries, for example, 10% of girls become mothers by age 16. This is according to the United Nations data, where the highest rate of concentration of these teenage pregnancy is actually in sub-Saharan Africa, okay, which is the I think the more middle northern part of Africa, and of course South Central and Southeast Asia, okay, which is where we are currently. So one of the reasons why teenage marriage exists is because of the culture, right? So when we talk about culture, we must be wary, okay, that not all culture and tradition should be preserved, okay, at least not as the times change, right? So I'm sure all of you know about the traditions and the cultures of arranged marriage in certain areas of the world, for example, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, which we already saw in the statistics presented just now. Okay, so obviously arranged marriage is when the parents of the child do either forcefully or by some sort of manipulation get their children married, all right, or in this case we call it betrothed. Okay, get their children betrothed. You can go and Google the definition later on. Now, what's the problem? More than often, okay, the family name of the father here is often prioritized. Okay, what does this mean? Basically, the idea is that they don't want this marriage, okay, to basically throw the family face lah. Okay, so what they will do is to forcefully minimize the conflict between the couple, all right, and this is done in many, many, many different means, okay? And oftentimes, these girls, especially who are forced into the marriage in sort of arranged marriages, they often stay not because they want to, but because they have nowhere else to go, right? You already betrothed in those cultures, right? It's shameful to get a divorce, especially if it is an arranged marriage. And for many of them who come from low income families, why would you get divorced, right? When you have a relatively stable family, you have relatively stable income, right? If they get divorced and they leave the relationship, then they really have nothing, right? And that's why most of them do stay. And yeah, speaking about that, although I didn't write it on the screen, but I think a lot of men in developing countries, this is of course one of the research that has been done, seek younger brides because they are under the false impression that it will lower the chances of them contracting HIV/AIDS, right? Yeah. Why? Again, because of the idea that HIV/AIDS is of course a STI. Okay, but you must understand that HIV/AIDS is a pandemic, right? COVID-19 is not the only pandemic. If you go and Google WHO's information, you'll find out that HIV/AIDS is a pandemic, especially where low-income nations. Okay, so yeah, basically that is the false mindset that has come out of this particular situation, health situation across the world. Now, just some statistics for you. Miscarriage and death in the first week of a baby's life are 50% higher for children born to mothers younger than 20. Okay, so what does this mean? There is greater infant mortality. Okay, this term is important. Infant mortality, that is the formal term for miscarriage and death as a category here that we're discussing. So I want you to think again. We have been talking about LDCs, less developed countries. How do you think this particular issue of infant mortality will be exacerbated? It means increased in LDCs. Okay, so take some time to think about it. Alright, and the answer is really that in LDCs, the healthcare infrastructure on its own is already quite poor. Okay, so as a result, infant mortality in these countries would actually increase. Okay, so it's already 50% higher than mothers, born to mothers aged 20 to 29. Plus, you add on to the issue of the weak healthcare system in these nations, the infant mortality rate will simply increase. Okay, and that's a very, very terrible situation. Hold on, So this is a map of income distribution across the world. Countries in blue, right? They are actually highly developed nations or high income nations. Countries in yellow, medium, and countries in red are low income nations. Okay, or less developed nations. So you can see a concentration of the low income nations in Africa, right? This is what I meant by sub-Saharan Africa. So this particular region, sometimes it's referred to as the Sahel, all right? So this particular region is very low income, as you can see, right? In fact, the most poorest country in the world, Burundi, is somewhere here, right? And this is actually where the prevalence of teenage marriage exists. Okay, simply because there's economic value to it, which we'll get to in a second. So who is really in charge? And this is the place where you can get a lot of good information about this topic. The United Nations Population Fund. Okay, these are the lead UN agency responsible for pregnancy and teenage marriage issues, right? And according to them, right, just one statistics here, 20,000 girls under the age of 18 give birth in developing countries every year. Okay, and to put that into perspective, that would be how much? That's under the age of 18. We are not even considering the under the age of 20. Okay, and this is essentially, you must remember, this is underage. Okay, based at least on the United Nations definition of what an adult is. Okay, so we're gonna go look into case studies for countries. Okay, this will help you in creating your context and your examples for your either your introduction context paragraph or your evaluation. Okay, for the Philippines, again, LDC. Okay, the PSA revealed that 24 babies are delivered by teenage mothers every hour. So every hour in the Philippines, at least 24 babies are delivered. 1 in 10 teenage girls in the Philippines is a mother. And before, I think last year, the age of consent in the Philippines was one of the lowest in the world at 12. Okay, 12 years old. That is P6 for us here in Singapore. Okay, and in fact, the lowest age of consent in the world is actually 11 currently. Okay, so this is a Philippines news article. Teenage pregnancies national social emergency. So their population commission is basically declaring that there's an emergency, a social emergency. In fact, last year, quite recently, last year, and this is a problem that the Philippines government, especially under the new president Marcos, right, the son of the former dictator, okay, is actually actively trying to work on, which is why the age of consent was actually raised, I think, late last year or early this year. Indonesia, another LDC. UNICEF 2018 study suggests that 1 in 6 Indonesian girls marry before they turn 18, which in perspective for Indonesia, which is one of the largest countries in terms of population and also land area, okay, that is 340,000 girls per year. Okay, 340,000 girls per year. And many of these girls, they marry even before they reach 15 years old. Okay, yeah. And in Indonesia, the minimum age for marriage for girls is actually at 16 years old, whereas for guys, boys, okay, it's at 19 years old. Right, that is suggestive of the situation on the ground. Now, why is it problematic? Right, according to the UN Declaration on Human Rights, there needs to be free and full consent to marriage. Okay, what does it mean by free and full consent? Obviously, when one of the parties is deemed to be not sufficiently mature to make an informed decision, for example, a decision about marriage, it is not free and full consent. Okay, because if you don't know already, children cannot sign contracts for this exact reason. Okay, because they are deemed not sufficiently mature to make these decisions. Similarly, it is also linked to the right of freedom of expression and the right to be protected from abuse, right? And we'll discuss why in a second when we talk about the impact. So the first reason why teenage marriage exists, and the main reason arguably, is financial incentive. Okay, a lot of needy families, their marriage of these young girls to other families, especially to wealthier families, is seen as a financial transaction. Okay, because often the dowry that is given will be able to boost the economic status of these needy families. And so some countries actually do offer financial assistance or incentive for parents to delay their daughters' marriages. So in India, for example, I think a few of the states actually have this Apni Beta Apni Dhan program, which is Our Daughters Our Wealth in, I think, Hindi. Okay, Indian government basically offering bonds meaning a sum of money, okay, that can only be redeemed only and only if their daughters remain unmarried when they turn 18. Okay, so yeah, so if they do not, if they're already married before 18, then this bond is now in void, right? So this is essentially a way for them to actually encourage the parents not to marry off their daughters, all right? Yeah, so you can see girls were seen as by their families as a burden to be married off and not in fact an asset. So this program is actually trying to change that mindset. That's why it's called Our Daughters Our Wealth. Okay, in countries like Nigeria and Ethiopia, again, more LDCs. Okay, direct cash assistance is offered by the government and the condition that they invest the daughters in their daughters' education. So basically, the government is giving families money to keep their daughters in school. All right, keep their daughters in school. Oops. Okay, some statistics for you. This is a prevalence of children, okay, being married before 18 years old in ASEAN countries, not including Brunei, Malaysia, and Singapore. Okay, so these are the lower developed nations in our ASEAN realm. Okay, so you can see the darker blue is 15 years old, so married before 15, and the lighter blue is married before 18. Okay, so Cambodia, you can see Laos, all right, having one of the highest percentages there, and then followed by Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, and so on. And before you think it is just a third world problem, it is not. US, first world country, definitely. 45 of the 50 US states continue to allow girls and boys below the age of 18 to wed. Okay, so they are basically legalizing child marriage. 9 states have established no absolute minimum age, which means people of any age can get married, and this includes older people getting married to much younger people. Australia, an 18-year-old can, for instance, marry a 16-year-old as long as they have judicial approval, which means approval from the justice system. And in Singapore, a 16-year-old can get married even to somebody that's older as long as there's number one, parental consent, and number two, judicial approval. So it is definitely not a third world problem. It's not just a third world problem. It is more prevalent in the third world for reasons we already discussed, but it does impact first world countries as well. So please get rid of this misconception that it is only a third world problem. That is a very narrow mindset. Okay, and this is an extension question for you to think about for your HBL. Okay, how has the COVID pandemic impacted the prevalence in child marriages worldwide? Okay, there is a link, right? And you have to remember, what is the problem with COVID-19? Economic impact, social impact, right? Prevalence of child marriage. Remember, one of the main reasons is financial transactions. So in a time of economic recession and horrible economy, wouldn't the prevalence of child marriage increase? Okay, there's a lot of articles that you can read about it, and this is a key thing, key concept that you can bring up if your essay topic does allow you to do so. Okay, so just to end off, we're going to recap what are some of the main issues here. So it's obviously a violation of child right. It denies children the right to education and social mobility. Social mobility being something you learned in SS before, which is moving up the SCS ladder. Denies children and teenagers the right to make vital decisions about their own sexual health and well-being. And it has increased risk of violence, abuse, ill health, or early death. Specifically, I want to focus on abuse. This is statistics done, okay, by I think an organization on child marriages, okay, on domestic violence for young women who are married, okay, in India, one of the states. Okay, so you can see the questions there. In the last 6 months, did your husband slap or beat you, threaten to abandon you, or throw you out, or verbally abuse you? You can see, definitely, at least according to how this statistic is presented, that those married before 18 have an increased prevalence of such abuse. Okay, same goes for decision-making power. So decisions regarding children, friends, schooling, or education. Again, the decision-making power is much lower, especially for those married below 18 years old. Okay, so it's often abusive, to say the least. Okay, in Peru, child marriage has been found to increase a woman's chances of being abused. And you must remember, okay, or I'll just tell you now because I don't think most of you would know. Okay, in Peru, this is a country where more than half of women, Peruvian women, have experienced physical or sexual abuse. Okay, so in a country where there's already such a high prevalence of sexual abuse or physical abuse, child marriage increases these chances even more. Okay, in Kenya, African country, 36% of girls married before 18 believe that a man is sometimes justified. So you can just sometimes justified in beating his wife. Okay, so we can see the mindset. Okay, the mindset here has already been indoctrinated into women especially. Okay, and yeah, that's quite a sad and glaring statistic. And so I'm just going to show you end off with some photos. And yes, this is inherently an issue that impacts young women the most. Is that to say young men are not caught in the same issue of child marriage? No, it's not true. The betrothment process, okay, or even the process of arranged marriage does negatively impact young men as well. Right? Same thing. It may not be as prevalent, but they are also forced into marriage sometimes. And why? Because you must remember, okay, in those countries, especially in those cultures, there is this uh primogeneity, okay, that men are prioritized over women, but at the same time men carry the bloodline of their families, and so families and their parents would want them to marry somebody who is deemed suitable enough to carry on this bloodline. And so they are often caught in this child marriage situation as well. So it's not just a women problem, it is also a men problem. Okay, so we should be looking at it as a holistic, as a whole issue, okay, rather than just focusing on one aspect. But it is truth that unfortunately young women are affected much more. Okay, so these are some photos. That was, I think, in Pakistan. This is a photo from the US. So you can see the young girl on the right is getting married to this man here, who looks significantly older lah. Okay, and you can see generally the sentiment here in this photo. Okay, and this is one of the websites or one of the organizations that's helping to end child marriage across the world. Okay, Girls Not Bright. So you can go and look at their website, girlsnotbright.org. Okay, and yeah, find out more about this particular issue. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point. Okay, I'm done for today's lecture. All right, there's 2 more weeks to your mid-year exams. Okay, so I'll try my best to talk finish about this impact or this issue on youth. Okay, but the rest of the topics you gotta go and research on your own, and it's easier to do by countries as always. Right? So have a good HBL, and yeah, I will see you back tomorrow. Have a good day, guys.